Let me begin the new discussion on the topic infrastructure in an open economy. We will discuss today that what is basically the open economy and how in an open economy infrastructure development is one of the more challenging as well as more easy job compared to a closed economic model. Let me begin with what is basically the difference between the open economy and a closed economy. So, the brief outline of this presentation is basically the discussion on open economy, economic liberalization, and how this particular economic liberalization process gives us an opportunity to have the infrastructure development particularly in an open framework of the economic development. So, what is basically the difference between the open and closed economies or in terms of the theory of economic openness and the closed economic aspect. The closed economy, a closed economy is one that does not interact with other economies in the world. There are no export, no import and no capital flows. Closed economy is not really looking for any external linkages of the domestic economy, and in such a situation most of the resources which an economy is having, they are basically consumed, resources are basically exploited within the domestic framework. They are not really closed economy is not really looking for the resources outside the economy. At the same time their production and consumption are subject to the domestic demand and domestic supply. They are not really looking for the consumption outside the domestic economy or the supply of resources, supply of product, supply of raw materials from other than the domestic economy. So, there are no export, no import and no capital flows. That is basically the major structure of the economy, where economy is not really looking for any export and import business, and capitals are not flowing from each part to other part of the economy. A capital can flow within the economy, but capital cannot flow outside the economy. The open economy is completely different from the closed economic model, and we can see that by 1990 or majority of the countries before 1990 they were generally the restricted economy, or one can say that they were working on a very closed economic framework. But with 1991 we are finding, after 1990 we are finding that majority of the economy of the world has realized that government is not really going to continue all the responsibilities in the production, but government has to come out from the production and government has to become facilitator, not the producer in the production process. So, in open economic framework that interacts freely with other economies of the world, around the world, interacts with other countries in two ways. First, it purchases and sells goods and services in world product market, and at the same time it also purchases and sells capital assets in world financial market. So, not only open economy deals with the goods market, but open economy deals with the capital market. So, in two different equations you can see here how closed economy works. Closed economy's output y is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditure, C plus I plus G, while the asset markets in the closed economy is saving equal to investment plus government expenditure minus the taxes. So, there is only one medium of exchange and that is basically the domestic currency in the closed economic framework, where the assets are being sold and purchased. There is not any foreign exchange involved in that, and even in the goods market, when the currencies when the goods are traded within the economy, there is not any role of any foreign currencies to be involved in that particular economy. Compared to the previous equation, the open economic model here is little different from the closed economic framework, because here the Y or the gross domestic product is the combination of consumption plus investment plus government plus net export, which is the export minus import NX. So, here we are finding that a new component, two new components are added in this equation, and that is basically the export and import, and the balance between the export and import is basically the net export, which is also the part of, which is the prime part of this open economic equation. So, before dealing with this circular flow, I would like to draw a diagram here to explain what is basically the difference between the closed economy and the open economy, and how this is going to really give us more output in the economy. So, in this diagram, this is the equilibrium line 45 degree, and we can see here on O x axis and O y axis, we can put in on O y axis we can put here the real GDP, and on this axis we can put the aggregate expenditure AE of the economy. So, let me first discuss what is basically the closed economic equation C plus I plus G. So, when this type of condition occurs, this is basically equal to Y in the closed economy, and if we move from closed economic model to the open economic model, the new income level is generated, and that is basically the C plus I plus the G plus export minus import. We can find out that there is a change in the, if it is OX and OY, and if it is the real GDP Y in the economy, we can find out that this is the first level of output, while this is the second level of output. The difference from Y0 to Y1 is happening because the economy has moved from the previous level of equilibrium to the new level of equilibrium, and the economy is generating more income here due to the rise in the aggregate expenditure, and this rise in the aggregate expenditure is happening because of the change in the export minus import. So, this difference, the difference which one can see here between Y0 to Y1 is basically the change in the real GDP of that particular economy. So, the change in this real GDP of a particular economy is happening due to the openness, and that openness is going to lead us more output. It means that openness is going to lead us in the direction of more consumption, more investment, and more capital flow and net earnings outside the domestic economy. So, one can also see here the circular flow in the open economy in this particular diagram. There are so many components which works together. There are imports, there are exports, consumption, investment, government expenditure, and export and import. All these components are working together in a circular flow in the economy. So, when the moment we are restricting the inflow of the capital, the moment we are restricting the inflow of the goods, the moment we are restricting the outflow of the goods, we are not really having the circular flow of the factors of production, because we are basically restricting some of the factors not to move out and some of the factors of other economy not to come in. So, in that case open economic framework provides us an opportunity to get different factors of production from outside. At the same time, if our factors of production has the productivity, and if it is ready to reduce the cost of production, then they are also in the position to sell the products in the international market. As we have discussed that majority of the economists have argued, and government has started thinking, policymakers has started thinking in 1980s that government interference in the market is inefficient, and government should be that interference should be limited in especially in case of production. wherever government was directly involved in the production, it was found out that government, instead of having a much better efficiency in the production, they were really inefficient in the production. Cost of production were very high, overstaffing were done in the public enterprises and many firms, and at the same time government was on the back foot to have really contributing the production process, because there was huge investment but in terms of the return was not really conducive, was not really supportive to the government agenda of having the production with the efficient manner. So, there was backtrack in the government policy started in 1980s, and economic liberalization process started, and this process encompasses through the process of including government policies that promotes free trade, deregulation, elimination of subsidies, price control, rationing system, and often the downsizing or privatization of the public services, as we have discussed in our previous lecture also. So, these attempts were basically to have the economic liberalization process on the right track. The moment you are having more restricted policy in terms of trade, more import tariff on the product, entry of the product, more you are worried for your own local producer, you are protecting the local producer with huge subsidy, and at the same time you do have the price control mechanism, rationing system. When you do support the through the subsidy, you do support the producers in a way so that they are in the position to supply the product on a very cheap price. In such a protective environment, in such a protectionist approach of the government, we found that there were many economic inefficiencies also gathered in the economy, and in return it was very difficult for many government to run the show, especially the public enterprises and public activities, because there was a question and there was a issue of who will support and how it will be supported in terms of having the financial expenditure on running those public enterprises. So, economic liberalization, in brief, it can be defined as the legal right to involve in economic activity either at neither domestic nor foreign country to guarantee public interest, at large investment which needs a freedom, conditional or institutional and policy constraint. Economic liberalization provides an opportunity to the investors having a legal right to invest, because whenever government is liberalizing the policy, government is also having the legal support to have to have the sustainability of that policy, and that is named as the first generation reforms to the second generation reforms. When we have the policy change, it is the policy change is treated as the first generation of reform. When you have the change in the legal rights, when you have the change in the legal structure of the economy, you have the second generation of reforms, and when you have both the reforms together, then you have really the economic liberalization process smooth in the economy. So, there are benefits of economic liberalization, and those benefits are completely different from the problems which we were facing at the time of complete government interference in the production process. So, these benefits are basically the increase in the trade and commerce, as we have discussed that liberalization reduces the barriers, it provides an opportunity to the producers to really compete, local domestic producers to compete with the world producers, world producers are also having an opportunity to compete with the local producers, and it increases the investment capacity of the economy, because investment is more in the more economic framework. When we say investment is not only the domestic investment, but it is also the private investment from outside the world. So, this type of economic liberalization openness do provide us an opportunity to get the new technology, and the transfer of technology is possible through such economic liberalization. At the same time, we have enhanced competition level. What is enhanced competition level? More we are having the protectionist environment, our industrialists are our producers are more in a very safe and very one can say in a very lethargic condition. They do not want to really invest in the R&D, they do not want to know the new innovations of the world, they do not only worried for the production, but they are also worried for sustaining that production without any real change in the production system. So, innovations are suffering in that case, but when the economic liberalization process starts, it is also the innovation which really get boost from the investment, and then we are really getting the economies of a scale, because the producers from one country, they are, if they are also allowed to sell the products in other country, they are in the position to really have the economies of a scale at larger level and to reduce the cost of production. And finally, this type of process is giving us the benefits in consumption, more consumer surplus. One can read the consumer surplus in any microeconomics books, where we can see that how a product which is supposed to be available in a different price is now available in a little lower price, and that consumer surplus is through the involvement of varieties of other producers of the world together in any liberalized market. So, these are the benefits which we have discussed today, and one can also see here that how global economic liberalization is started in different part of the world. If it is started in 1991, then there are many other economies which has started economic liberalization process little far before the 1991, such as economic reforms in China 1978, also in Soviet Union 1986 as a part of perestroika and glasnost. You can also see Estonia and other countries which has started in 2000, Brazil 1980 to 90, Chile 1980, Vietnam 1986, again Cuba 1994, and Australia 1980s. So, it is not the one country, but there are many countries in the world which has really seen that protectionist environment or the protecting the local industrialist. At the same time, the involvement of the government in the production is not going to have more better efficient results. So, it is better to come out from the government interference in the production, but to concentrate more on the regulatory part. As a new role of the government is established, which was discussed by Joseph Stiglitz as the third way consensus, apart from the World Bank and IMF consensus. And since this third way consensus is basically the mix of the government and the private body, because it is not only the government alone which has to do all the whether infrastructure development or other economic and social development, but it is also the private party which has to really concentrate on providing better opportunities for the production and consumption with new innovations and infrastructure developed through the new technology. So, with this background, we can see here that how various economies had also developed their infrastructure with the help of new policy and new innovations. The credit goes to the economic liberalization process. Let me also briefly discuss the Indian case, because India, as Arvind Pangaria and many other economists, Jagdish Bhagwati, has also considered that before 1991, India was one of the most restricted economy of the world, and even Pascal Lamy in 2009, after the financial crisis, has made this statement that India is the most restricted economy in the world today, even in the current framework of economic liberalization. So, Indian economy was considered as one of the closed economy with falling dominant features before July 1991, and these dominant features were the dominance of public sector in industrial activity, discretionary controls on industrial investment and capacity expansion, trade and exchange were controlled, limited access to the foreign investment, public ownership and regulation of the financial sector. So, in this getting this type of background was very much controversial for India, because majority of the international organizations and economists were pointed out that how long India is going to continue with such economic restrictions and control. So, major reforms introduced in industrial policy, trade policy and financial sector, and as we noticed that on 24th July 1991, India came out with the new industrial policy, And after that we are finding that there is a new U-turn in the trade policy also. Instead of trade restrictions, a huge tariff reduction was also implemented in India. The average tariff which was before 1991, there were several economies such as Brazil, India and Pakistan which has the average tariff rate very high, around 3% average nominal tariff rate, which has now come down to 10% today, especially in India. And we were also having a very strict financial sector, very controlled financial sector, but today we realize that economic liberalization in India has also given freedom in the financial sector. So, in industrial policy reforms we can see here that evolution of licensing and other restrictions, import of the foreign technology, public sector disinvestment, entry to the foreign investment, and the removal of the monopolistic and restricted trade practice, that is called as the MRTP Act. In terms of trade, we can see here that import duties were reduced. Also the simplification in export and imports process were done, and current account convertibility were also achieved. At the same time, we found that fiscal policy reforms were practiced, capital market reforms were initiated, and the monetary reforms were also practiced in India, and this is all because of the India's connection with the international economy and India's openness with other international partners. Infrastructure in an open economy. After the discussion on India, one can find out that how infrastructure is one of the major item which is being developed in the open economy more faster than the closed economy. At the same time, how the principles of open economy cannot survive without having the proper infrastructure. Infrastructure services are generally considered as a public goods, as we have discussed that non-rival and non-excludability in consumption is available with this infrastructure. So, stocks are bulky, infrastructure stocks are bulky with long period of gestation, and at the same time it involves complex development process, as we have also discussed. So, return occur in the long run with uncertainties. The sole private participation is difficult if not possible, but government has limited finance due to the other obligation in the most of the country of the world today. So, in this condition, when government has the limited resources, but at the same time private partners are not really more certain about what returns they are going to get, and when they have the sole private participation in many of the models which we have discussed as a part of public private partnership in previous lecture, where sometime government is just allowing the private party to build and transfer the project, sometimes government is allowing them to build, lease and transfer, sometimes government is allowing them to build, own and transfer. So, ultimately a major participation from the private parties are involved in the infrastructure development in any case of the public private partnership. So, to meet the financial crunch in infrastructure, open economic model is needed, because when we say open economic model, we do allow the investors from any part of the world to join our hand, and when do we allow such investments to join our hand, we do not really stop the process of infrastructure development, because we do involve the enhancement in the infrastructure development process. In case of closed economic model, even if we required some flyovers, we required some infrastructure such as ports or airports or any other things, we do have to depend only on our own sources, because the model itself, the economic model does not allow us to look for the foreign capital, because closed economic model is completely against those foreign participations and involvement. So, it looks like that infrastructure development in the liberalized model is more appropriate, because there are huge financial assistance investments which is received in the form of foreign direct investment and foreign institutional investment. We will have a separate discussion on FDI and FII in infrastructure in our next lecture, but we can just see here that reforms and liberalization policies is more augment to have the foreign investment on track, and this is one of the major achievement of getting the infrastructure ready through the open economic model. To summarize the entire discussion, we can say that when we move from the E to E1 level or the Y01 to Y1 level in terms of production, it is not possible without the help of the open economic model, because when we are only controlled with our own resources, when we are not really considering the factors which is available outside the country, outside the domestic periphery, then we are basically restricting our production process. And when we are in the position of really developing countries, especially populated country like India or Pakistan or Brazil or China, these countries are really in need of having much better infrastructure today compared to the smaller economies which we have discussed as the newly industrialized countries example in our previous lecture, which is very small in terms of population compared to India or compared to China. So, when we have big population to serve, we cannot really work on the old model of the economic development, and we have to look for the new opportunities. We have to look for the new equilibrium. We have to look for the new investment, and that is not possible without opening up the economy. So, infrastructure development in an open economy is not only the need of the hour, but it is indeed important to have such policy going on. Otherwise, it will be really difficult and challenging to serve the infrastructure for the majority of the population in India and in other developing country and less developed country. Thank you.